Thanks, Darren. So good morning, everybody. Oops. I'm going to take you through to a slide which is actually at the end. There's a reason why. It'll become apparent right from the very start. So just bear with me for a moment, please. I didn't think about this one until this morning that I really should have put it at the beginning. Okay. About 10% of applications are successful. So I'm going to ask you the question. So you actually want to have a bit of a play in the grant space. You want to think about starting to write some applications, etc. So I've just made a statement there that might turn you off if about 10% of applications are successful. It's a bit frightening. But let me give you some reasons, and I'll come back to this information in a minute as to why you actually should. Anybody got any idea what sort of money is available within that whole philanthropic environment in Australia? Anybody want to throw a figure out there? Nobody game? Okay, 2018, top 50 companies in Australia, $945 million was contributed to philanthropic causes. It was up $90 million on 2017 figures. There's a reason. Secondly, I read something some months ago, and I've been trying to find it since, and I haven't been able to, as to how successful sport has been in this particular space. It was a figure of about 3 or 4%. So let's bring that back. Let's just do some maths for a minute. $900 million, bring it back to 3%, ballpark of maybe about $40 million. Guess how much money went through the Australian Sports Foundation last year and was raised by sports? Add those figures up, and this is just pure coincidence, but not far off. How many of your sports are represented up there today?
What's multi-sport? Yeah, all put your hand up, multi-sport.
I don't know, because I actually didn't go into the information in Australian Sports Foundation to figure it out, but I had exactly the same question, because it'd be really nice to know. Maybe that's just a very broad cross-section, if you like, of many other sports, and they've just dumped it into multi-sport, perhaps. That's what I expect. So again, we come back to the question, why should we actually play in this particular space? Because there's nearly $1 billion. Now, globally, there's a general rule for about 1% of corporations. It's not a requirement. It's probably more of an obligation. So let's call it a sense of social responsibility. That companies, before they pay their taxes, contribute money towards community benefit, philanthropic causes. There's a rule globally about 1% per company. In Australia last year, that $945 million equated to about 0.68%. Do the maths again. The figures come out and say there's potentially another $600 million that the top 50 companies in Australia that publish this information could be contributing to philanthropic causes. Now, I know there's a lot of numbers in there. Point being, we should be playing in this space. We called it out in future directions that sport and active recreation doesn't do enough work in this particular space. So here's the opportunity. Even from a grant writer's perspective, it's still very, very difficult. I mentioned before that about 10% are successful. Vast majority of applications are oversubscribed. But even from our perspective at Red Tape Busters, we have around about a 50% success rate. Yet I was even talking to one of the senior consultants yesterday, and he said, Andrew, we write really good quality applications. Once it goes in, he said, we've got no control over it. And he said, it's amazing how many times we get knocked back, even though the quality of their application is actually very, very good. So just keep some of those things in mind. As I said, point being, it's worth playing in this particular space. The question is how. I'm going to do a bit of a workshop with you. It'll test you. It takes you outside your comfort zone, because we need to think a little bit differently in terms of our sport in order to have some success in this space. So just be with me for a minute, please, just while I go back to the beginning. All right, I won't go through detail of my background. Darren's given you a little bit more, but the information's in here. I may not get through everything in here. There's information at the end about the services that we provide. I'm hanging around afterwards. Please have a chat. This information will be circulated to you, so it's fairly self-explanatory. But there's some areas that I do want to cover off. I actually want to hear from you. I actually want to get some input. So it gives you an opportunity to talk because you've been probably sitting for quite a while this morning. So let's hear a little bit. We're going to cover a bit of your experiences, your own individual experiences of any of those who actually do write applications here. How you would describe your organisation's level of activity, experienced, dabble, novice, don't know where to start, and what's your own personal individual experience as well in that particular space. Is grant writing a role in your organisational structure? What's your strategy in terms of sourcing opportunities? Once you've identified a grant, what steps do you go through to implement and write a grant? We're going to do a little bit of workshopping from the 2019 Sport Australia Participation Grant. We're going to pick a couple of sections in there, break up into little groups, etc. And that's the sheet that you've actually been given as well, because the only way to learn from these things is to workshop some of this sort of stuff. I'll give you some information about my approach that I actually go through in terms of looking to write applications. If we get to it, a bit about how we can help, because my general comment is have the courage to reach out. This is hard. It's hard to write, it's hard to spend the time, and we'll get to that. And also as well, I'm going to make a suggestion. There is some information on the Sport New South Wales website about guiding principles, if you like. And I've actually just spoken to Darren about maybe we could rework that a little bit more. There's some work could be done in that particular space. And I'm certainly happy to help with that, update that information, and then obviously Sport New South Wales can circulate it. And the other element as well is actually providing you with a grant matrix template. It's literally an Excel spreadsheet, but that you can use to drop your information in as to the processes that I'm going to suggest you actually work through when you're writing applications. All right, so over to you. Who's going to toss it up? What are your experiences? Your own organisation's experience, your success rate, individually as well. What would you describe as your level of activity, both as an individual and organisation, and his grant writing role in your organisation's structure? Where's my first bid? Go on.
So I'm with the local community football club in Bankstown.
Yes.
Grant writing is my role, volunteer role, my roles in the team. We look for grants in order to mostly improve infrastructure around our club and our fields.
Yes.
We've been successful. We've got a number of grants for different projects. The last one we got was to $5,000 for some fitted women's jerseys, rather than them wearing the same unisex type of playing strip.
Yes.
We've got some women's fitted jerseys for our women's teams.
Yes. What would you describe as your success rate? Any idea?
Yeah, pretty good. Maybe around about 50%.
Okay, and where do you go looking?
Basically, New South Wales sports grants that come around every year.
Yes.
New South Wales ones. And
As in through Office of Sport?
yeah,
Yes. Yep.
And then there's the Sports Australia grant. We were successful with that one last year.
Yes.
And then there's the Telstra grant, which I love the Telstra grant.
The which one, sorry?
The Telstra grant.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Okay, yep,
Because we've got such a large players base, you need someone who actually works for Telstra.
of course.
Because we've got 850 players, somebody's family, mother.
Correct.
brother must work.
Absolutely right. Well done, local community. Okay, so that's community experience, local community experience. Anybody else share some experiences? Go on.
Local government.
Local government? Yep.
Um,
Where are you from, sorry?
Cumberland.
Cumberland, go on.
Success rate is good. Probably 70%.
Okay, well done.
Individual experience is good. Probably the highest one was the Greater Sydney Facility Fund.
Yes,
2.7 million.
yes,
Level of activity, yep, experienced. My own individual experience is good. I didn't write the proposal myself, but I knew who to go to get the information.
well done.
A lot of research into it. Sport Australia. Yeah, so there's a lot of research into grant proposals. That last one, no.
So, grant writing role in your organisational structure. You're talking about within your sport generally?
No, within
State sporting organisation?
the council's organisation.
Right. Okay. Okay, fine. Yep, all right. Anybody else? We got any, where are our SSOs that are represented here today? Have we got any feedback from you?
Yeah, probably haven't had a crack at enough. But
Yes.
Successful with the ones that I probably had a crack at because I knew that we had a reasonable chance of being successful.
Which sport?
Baseball.
Okay, good. Yes.
struggle because we're just the units, etc. Generally around administrative grants.
Yes.
So as an organisation, we've been successful. We haven't tried a lot. Individually, probably between dabbling and I don't mind doing them. And, so I understand it's just time consuming.
It is.
So we don't have a dedicated resource.
Of course. Very few do.
My grants through Grant Guru.
Yes.
Just where I get notified, and then we looked at third-party grant writers, and from a board level, they didn't want us. They were trying to incorporate the funding for that from the success rates of the grant, and chicken or the egg.
Sometimes you can. Some grants you actually can incorporate the grant writer's costs. Something you've got to be mindful of is actually what the grant writer's costs are. And there's enormous differences, if you like, between what they charge as well. Yep, okay. Anybody else? Any other experiences? Go on.
Paddle New South Wales.
Yes.
We apply for a good number of grants, basically through the state government, and successful about 50% of the time.
Okay.
Fortunately, we've got one of our board members who is a business development, who works in business development. So
Yes.
we're really focused on doing grant applications and on success, and their personal success rate is very high, like about 90%.
Yes, okay.
We're fortunate in that regard.
Yep, okay. Would you consider it part of your organisation's structure generally?
We've adopted it.
Yes, okay.
We haven't made it a particular role because it's a very small organisation.
Yes.
We're just fortunate we have those skills.
Of course, yes. So I'll sum that up a little bit in saying, in some cases there's elements of being proactive, but there's also elements here of being reactive. In other words, you see something, got an idea, and we actually want to go for that. So then you're scrambling a little bit. Not uncommon. All right. So for those who actually I should ask, do any of you as organisations actually have a strategy in this particular space? Amazing. And not surprising, so please don't be offended. All right, so let's just go through this for those of you who actually done it. So once you've identified a grant, just quickly walk me through. So what are the steps you actually go through? Let's take paddle for an example. So what steps would you go through in terms of you've identified a grant, what do you do next?
Well, the grant is there, but we've got to have a reason to apply it.
Of course, okay,
So
yep,
First of all, we may have developed a list of priorities.
Yes, good.
For sport development, and we have to try and make the best fit for our needs.
correct.
To match that grant.
Yep, okay, so let's say you've done the matching process. What do you do from there? Who do you talk to? Because you probably need to get a bunch of information.
Yes, we need, well, specifically budgeting.
Yes,
And so we need to work out the suppliers or the providers of services.
Yes.
Or facilities. So we need to look at what the grant is worth and to budget according to what we think we can achieve with that grant.
yes, okay, yep, fine, yep. Anybody else? We've had some takers over here. Yep, go on.
I looked around at some of our mums, and one of them was a grant assessor.
Okay,
Local council, so
Yes.
I wrote her,
yep, well done.
and she wrote 2 grants and we got them.
Okay, and they were written to whom? They were
Office of Sport.
They were Office of Sport grants. Yep.
And also 2 local members. as
Okay,
well. Let
yes.
us know when the grants
Correct.
come out, federally and state.
Yep. You going to say?
I think the trick that I thought was most critical is understanding what the grant was requesting,
Correct.
and then sort of get the scope of what it was being offered for, as opposed to you want this, but they're asking for that, marrying up the expectation against
Absolutely. So the point there is, and I'll come to it. It's called the funding guidelines. That's your Bible when it comes to grant writing. Need to know what's in there. Keep referring back to it. When you get to the end and you think you've written it, go back to the funding guidelines, read them again, get somebody else to read it, get them to read the funding guidelines, because if you don't tick the boxes, that's the first reason you're going to get tossed out the door. I should have asked the question as well. So we've had quite a bit through Office of Sport. We've had a bit through local government. Anybody, we've had Telstra. Many gone outside of that traditional space and gone into perhaps more philanthropic areas, foundations, any of those sorts of spaces, superannuations, banks, yes?
Yeah, with orienteering, the Carbine Club,
Yes,
with a
Yes, okay.
Better contact through there, and they supported us for many years.
Great. Yep. Gillian, you
Clubs New South Wales.
of course. Yep. Does anybody go through Clubs New South Wales? Okay. Good opportunity. All right. So I'm actually going to throw this to you. Spend about 15 minutes. In front of you, you've actually got a sheet. We're divided. So we've got this half will do the objectives, and this half will actually do the other part. I can't remember what the other part is off the top of my head. So this is from the Sport Australia Participation Grant 2019. I'll give you a little bit of information about that one. The initial round came out with about 13.8 million, or 13.2 million, I think was initially released. My reaction to this grant, I wrote 2 grant applications, one for New South Wales Rugby League and one for Netball New South Wales. I think in total there were about 3 SSOs that were successful, and there was 1 club in the announcement of all the money that was actually handed out. A lot of money was given to NSOs. That makes sense. But what struck me as well was there was a lot of money that went to what I call non-traditional sporting organisations that are running sport programs, PCYC as an example. And that sort of thing worries me. I don't have a problem with the money going to those places at all, but there's a lot of sports I think are actually missing out on these opportunities. So I thought this was a very competitive grant. It's on again in January, as it will be a number of other Sport Australia applications. And I thought it might be worth just spending a little bit of time letting you scribble some ideas down and have a crack. And then you can actually write it up. And if you want to send it to me, because my email address is in here, please send it to me and I'm happy to certainly give you some feedback. It takes time to get these right. What's also difficult with these is you might only have 200 to 250 words. It's actually not a lot when you're trying to write a national grant for potentially a national program or a state program. But it's also important that you get high quality words in there as well, and you condense your information. When I was at the Office of Sport, I actually did help out the grants team over there, and I did it deliberately because I actually wanted to see what it was like reading and reviewing the applications. And it was very, very interesting. It was almost like marking essays if you're a lecturer or a teacher or anything like that, and you think, oh my gosh, you know, it was just incredibly frustrating trying to read through the lines and think this could just be condensed and so much more succinct. And that's actually the important part, because if you can communicate your message well, you've got actually a better chance. So I thought we actually might spend a little bit of time. I'm happy to go and answer any questions or give you any help if you want at the time. So we've got this side is actually doing objectives, so you need to scribble down on your paper. And this side is actually doing, I think it's the communication side from memory. So we'll spend about 10 or 15 minutes, probably no more. So you've got some time up your sleeve now. Work either, you can work as individuals, you can work together in your groups where you're actually from some of your individual sports. And I want you to actually have a crack at something like this, because you may be interested in writing this grant in January this year or thereabouts. So is that okay for everybody?
Sure.
You lot aren't going to do this? Come on. All right, so we might bring it back because I'm conscious of time and there's a few things I want to get through. And I have to finish by 12:30. I'm under very strict instructions because I know you're hungry and you've all got to get away. So let's just spend 2 minutes, and without actually going through what you wrote from the objectives and what you wrote from the communication side, I would actually just like to get a little bit of feedback on what your experience was. How did you actually find that in terms of trying to work out what your objectives are? And how did you find it in terms of trying to determine what we're going to write in terms of how we're going to communicate with people? So anybody want to just share some thoughts over here? Easy process, difficult process? Difficult? Yeah, why?
Finding the link, I thought, between what you want to do and how you want to do it
Yes.
is probably the most difficult thing.
Yep. Very fair point. Yep, okay. Anybody else?
I think once you start looking at things, so you
sort of start thinking outside the box a little bit and get opinions from other people, you sort of start looking at things differently.
Yes, agree. That's right. Yep. So really important, get input.
I think initially you start focusing on what you're not achieving in that sort of space, rather than going, okay, let's hone in on where we are ticking the boxes and focus on the ticking the boxes, rather than focusing on, oh, but we're not addressing that part. And that
Yes. Okay. So you're saying focus more on your strengths as opposed to, hey, we're not doing this part.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yep. Absolutely true.
Mine was, look, I seem to keep going back to the 250 words.
Trying to figure.
Be concise.
Yes.
And have impact.
That's right. Yep. It's like going back to school and writing an essay at school.
I think I found that because I'm interested in the value of the project, that I found it really easy to find objectives.
Good. Well done. Okay.
Depending on the project.
Yes. And something else as well to always keep me say little tips, etc. as well is oftentimes you might write one and you have success. Go back and use some of the words you've used there. You might be able to cross-reference and take objectives from there or information from that one. Don't go and reinvent the wheel. Yep. Anybody else?
I found it difficult to think about to make things because I work for an RTO, I don't work for a sporting organisation.
Yes.
So they look at us as us trying to make money.
Yes.
I'm applying for grants, so it's really difficult.
Yes.
So we have to find something else behind the reason we want to do it.
Okay.
So with this grant, it was the fact that we would be getting people from CALD or Indigenous background.
Yes.
They would be physically active while they were training. So they would be doing volunteer hours in the water, being physical, and then they would get employment from a physical job.
Yes.
So we had to go that way
Okay.
to get the money.
Yes, okay. And I think that draws on what I call a really, really important point. And this is where we need to change our thinking a bit. Don't think of your sport as the sport. We work in the sport. I work in sport too. I volunteer in sport. And I think about the sport. But one of the key lessons I learned working with Darren and writing Future Directions was to actually be able to take that step back. Instead of working in the sport, I was actually able to work on sport. I was able to have a different view of sport. So the key word I would say to you, key phrase I would say to you is think of your sport as the tool. It is the vehicle to deliver potentially what the outcome is. It's not just the fact that, hey, you obviously want people participating, but it's the tool for getting people to participate. Why? They might be underrepresented groups. They might be culturally and linguistically, they might be from culturally and linguistic backgrounds. They might be LGBT. There's a whole multitude. There's the health reasons, obesity, inactivity, etc. There's a whole multitude of reasons. Your sport is the vehicle for that particular reason. So this is where I say we actually need to change our thinking in the way we go about doing this. All right, good. So some good feedback, well done. Let me just give you an overview of how I go through it. So I'm going to say, think of this as applying for a job or undertaking your innovation. You don't sit down and write well, actually, some people probably do sit down and write a job application, 2 minutes, send it off, but how successful would they be? Not very. You certainly don't go into doing a renovation on a house or anything like that, or buying a new car as an example. You don't necessarily do it in a very spontaneous sort of way. So I'm just going to say, think about this in terms of applying for a job or undertaking renovation. So basically, and there's been a little bit of talk about this, develop a spreadsheet of grant opportunities. Now, the first place is, well, where do you go looking? I'll get to that in a little bit. But, and this is where I actually literally have a matrix. Find the grant organisation name, find the actual grant name, because the name of the grant may be different to what the organisation is. Very clearly have a look at what the grant focus areas, including the criteria and objectives. That's the high level stuff. That will also be in the funding guidelines, but that's the high level information, because that's going to tell you straight away, am I eligible for this or not? Or is my organisation eligible or not? So then look at the criteria. The criteria is absolutely crucial. It can be very broad. Sometimes it can be very narrow. Sometimes they can be local government areas only, generally not-for-profits, non-government organisations, community organisations, incorporated bodies. Sometimes we even see unincorporated bodies listed there as well. What's an unincorporated body? Writing for the Disabled New South Wales has centres. Those centres are all unincorporated. They actually do write applications themselves. Charities, key information, open and closing. You don't always get a lot of time. You generally do with government ones, but with non-government ones, oftentimes opening and closing dates can be quite short. What are the minimum max amounts applied for? There's no point in going and applying for a grant for $100,000 if the maximum you can only get is 5, and vice versa. Sometimes grants will have multiple rounds. You might be running events that happen at different times of the year, so be aware of that, because you may not be ready now, but you might say, okay, not ready now, but might be in 3 months' time. Look at the announcements. Sometimes there will be information there about when you'll actually know, because that gives you an idea as well as to when whatever it is is going to happen, or when you need your facilities, equipment, whatever it might be. What's the total pool of funds? Really, really important. If a pool of funds is only $100,000 and you know there might be 300 applications, what's your chances? Pretty small. Holden is a really good example of that. There's not a lot of money in that particular pool, the Holden Advantage one. I think the pool is about 250,000. I've never bothered putting an application. I've spoken to some organisations. I said, Andrew, we're not even interested. Just too hard. Some have to get it, fair enough. Argument is you've got to be in there, but it's really tough. Yet government grants they're not big in New South Wales generally, apart from some of the ones that the Office of Sport do have, and obviously Greater Sydney. But generally government grants can be quite beneficial and are quite large. When are the completion dates? Most of the time you might have 12 months. So you might put your application in, you might have to complete it by 30 June 2020, 31 December 2020. So you might have a 12-month period. What's the average amount awarded? That's really important as well, because you need to give yourself a realistic target about what you're actually looking for. Sometimes there'll be information there about who the past recipients are. I find that is really, really helpful, because that gives me a really good idea as to who I'm potentially competing against, and it gets me thinking about how I might need to write the grant to give me the best chance of success on behalf of the client. Where do you go? Sport New South Wales have a really, really comprehensive database now, which most of you are probably aware of. Certainly go to that. I'm doing a lot of research on other opportunities as well. Jess and I are in constant communication. If I find something that I know is relevant to the sports, I'll flick it through to her, but we're obviously tic-tacking on these sorts of things. So by all means, use the Sport New South Wales site. There's obviously links through Office of Sport as well, but most of what's that the Office of Sport recommend is also in the Sport New South Wales information. Populate your spreadsheet, populate your matrix. It's important to keep it up to date. Determine what it is you want to apply and how you're going to go about it. Talk to your colleagues and your committees, including might even be officiating. You're going to need to get information from a whole range of people. Again, you need to do that matching. Determine your priorities, match it against the grant opportunities. So you can actually match the two together to determine, yep, okay, I've got this one, I want to apply for this one at this point in time for this particular area. So you're basically almost developing a bit of a calendar for yourself. It can be helpful. Sometimes you can subscribe directly to both individual companies. The Funding Guru was mentioned before. These are just a couple of others. The Funding Centre, Our Community. For those of you that actually are in organisations, it's actually not expensive to subscribe to these. Funding Centre is only about $80 a year, so it isn't expensive. And there's, I can't even think, 2,500 maybe or more grants that come up. So there's certainly some very helpful ones there. And as I say, something you need to be doing all the time is monitoring your opening and your closing dates. So once you find the one that's open, read the funding guidelines very carefully. Don't just apply for the sake of it. I've already mentioned who you need information from. Treasurer, you might need president, operations staff. There's a whole raft of people that you might need to get information from. I'll specifically mention here, if you're doing anything that's to do with demographics, might be participation, for example, go to Profile ID. If you walk away with nothing out of today, Profile ID is effectively the ABS's information, census information, condensed into each individual local government area. Very, very easy read. So the work is actually done for you there. It doesn't cost for that. You can just go to Profile ID, log on, request your local government area, and it'll spit out a massive amount of information on your local government area. Very, very helpful. Create a project plan is also important. Because your timeline is actually quite short, that's actually really important. Start writing early. Most information can be dropped in, so you can drip feed it at different stages. Keep going back to the funding guidelines. Make sure you answer the question. Make sure your writing is clear and concise. Language becomes really important, particularly when you're writing applications to government. And what I've given here is a raft of individual words, and this is what I call the really important language that oftentimes governments like to hear, but organisations like to hear. So my suggestion is, whenever you're writing a grant application, look to use these sorts of words where you can, because they're very powerful and they get attention. You might need to write your application over a number of sittings. You won't necessarily sit there and have 5 to 7 hours or 10 hours or 2 hours in which you can write it. You might need to drip feed it. The advantage with a lot of systems is you can go in, put information in, save it, you can come back to it later. That's actually really helpful. Really important. And I remember Miguel actually saying this when I went to the seminar at Blacktown. Assume the assessor knows nothing about your sport. You know it, but this is where you have to wear a different hat. This is where the cultural issues come in. Review your application, get someone else to do it. Give them the funding guidelines. Get feedback from them. Basic stuff, spelling and grammar. Be realistic about the amount you're asking for. What you're trying to do is not give the assessor a reason to exclude you. Make sure you submit within a reasonable time of the closing date. Don't leave until the last minute. Sometimes applications will close at 5 p.m, sometimes they'll be at 11:59. What happens if you're up at 11:50 and you're trying to put it in and the system's gone down? You can't ring anybody to get technical support. Don't leave it till the last minute. Don't be offended if your application's unsuccessful. Remember I said 10% is about the standard. But go and ask for feedback. Go for the low-hanging fruit. Local community groups, definitely go for council. State sporting organisations, go for the Office of Sport. Start small. Build from there once you've got some experience up your sleeve. The process you go through is the same for small amounts as it is for large. Doesn't matter whether you're writing a 5,000 word essay or a 1,000 word essay. If you think back to school days, process is the same. Same here. I've mentioned competition is fierce. And I've said before, have the courage to reach out for help. If this is a space you want to play in, and my recommendation is that sport should be, then be prepared to reach out for help. But you actually need to make sure, if you're wanting to get some external assistance, look for the right organisation. Get an organisation that aligns with your values. And that's actually really important. One thing I will say about Red Tape Busters, where I do some consulting work, why did I sign up with them? Because they're based in Queensland. They had no presence here in New South Wales. I like the philosophy. Start small, prove our worth, develop the relationship. So it's a little bit about how we can help, as I've mentioned there. We work with clients to develop projects from a funding perspective. We work with all sorts of different organisations. We do all the matching, so we do all that legwork. We're doing the research, etc. We have what we call the living matrix, but you own it as your sport. We put it together for you, but you actually own it. And you make the decisions about which applications we write. We can prepare grant submissions. We can prepare sponsorship proposals. We certainly revise matrix as the client's needs change. So your business changes over the course of 12 months. We might need to change some things. That's perfectly fine. So we can also assist with the acquittal process as well. We'll individualise. There's a few ways we can be engaged. We can be on a retainer over a 12-month period. We can write individual grants. We can just be in an advisory capacity where you write it, we review it. So there's a number of ways that we can be very, very flexible in the way that we actually work with you. At the end of the day, you own this. We work for smallest clubs up to large national organisations as well. We've got experience in probably writing every single possible grant, yet I keep finding opportunities that are out there. As an example, there's a Shark Tank. So everybody's probably familiar with that concept of Shark Tank on TV. I've actually discovered a group called the Funding Network recently, and they actually use that as a type of model. So Darren and I were going to one of their seminars in September. Haven't seen this before, and I spoke to the owner of Red Tape Busters about it. He said, no, I haven't seen it either. Yet I know they've got tremendous links and work with charities and not-for-profit organisations, so we can see some real opportunities to tap into that space. Just some ideas what's open at the moment. Obviously, Greater Sydney Sports Facility Fund. Stronger Country Communities Fund, interesting one. This is why I asked the question about outside of sport. There's a lot of them that are out there that actually do have a sport flavour. Sun Super, Dreams of a Better Future. These are all in Sport New South Wales stuff. I just touched on the funding network. Expect obviously Office of Sport, number of their grants to be opening soon. Even from an individual perspective, some of these are open, some of these are closed. Although there aren't many, but there are opportunities out there for grants for athletes. And I've put information out to some of the sports as well and said, hey, communicate this information to your athletes. Sport's not playing in some of these spaces very well, such as the AMP Tomorrow Fund, yet they actually have a very strong sport flavour. All right, so I actually might stop there. There's a bunch of other information there, or just about philosophy and any questions. So I know I rushed through a little bit there at the end. Happy to take questions, but I'm also conscious of your time. And as I said, I'm going to hang around as well.